Oh, hey guys, welcome back. What we're going to do now is just try to tidy up the rest of our parametric window here. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. I've got it locked in here in our PDF just to give us a kind of preview of what we're going to try and do. So we've got, if you follow along, hopefully we've got our edges of our frame here for our window. And then really what we need to do now is get into I should say, the window frame itself. We need to generate that geometry for basically the tubes that are coming around our window. So all windows have frames, curtain wall frame or window wall frame, storefront frame. And then within that frame, we have our glazing unit. So for us, we're going to do a kind of preliminary style of window frame just to give us an idea of how this is going to look. And to get to that, what we're going to do is there's a couple things we have to do. We have to generate the geometry for the frame itself, and we have to generate the geometry for the glass unit here. So let's try and get that, and I'll show you a couple things, and then what we can do is we can adjust it parametrically to be where we want it to be. Let's check it out. So if I just jump into Revit here, I'm going to start with our window in plan. So this is where we left off. We've got remember how our reference planes are set. We've got this interior reference plane that's set. And just before I go too far here, you remember we've got these symbolic lines in here. So these are the symbolic lines. So if I just click on one of them, it just says lines, windows. These will show up in our plan views. So I did notice that in class that there were a couple of us that we kept these, and you can keep them if you want to, but what will happen is we don't really need to show them. So I would suggest it was just for me to demonstrate what we were trying to get to. And I think what we can do now is we can actually delete these symbolic lines. So you can actually hold the control key here and just click, if you've generated them, click our little symbolic lines here, hit the delete key, you can just delete there. So now all of our geometry is still intact for our window. We've got that kind of void form. Remember our void form? So the void form is starting from our interior offset to the interior work plane. And then our void blend, if you can remember, is from our interior offset to our exterior wall. So that all looks pretty good. Just to do a quick refresh here, if we want to come back to our family types, remember on the top left here, we've got the family types icon here, and that'll pull up our parameters for our window. We can just quickly check this out, make sure that everything still works. I haven't done anything, so hopefully this is all going to shake out, but we should see the geometry update here. So let's quickly change that to 1200. Yeah, we're still good to go. So put it back to 600 here. So hit apply. Okay, everything is still cool. So now the next thing we're going to need to do is we want to generate the frame itself. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to demonstrate what that means. So imagine that in plan, I'm going to do a couple of symbolic lines here again. So you're free to follow along here. You definitely don't have to. We've got, just imagine, we've got roughly here some window frames. And then the second thing we'll need to do is generate some glass. So that's okay. I got a little warning about overlapping lines. Obviously, this isn't perfect. It's also not necessarily parametric. It's not tied to anything. So I think the first thing that we want to do is get our frames organized. So let's go ahead and we can try that out. So I'm just going to go ahead and why don't I just delete these for now so we don't confuse anything. First thing we're going to do is generate the window frame. Deleted. Now let's go to our exterior elevation here. So let's grab this, double click that, open it up. We can see all of our geometry still exists. Everything's cool. Now what we want to do is we probably want to set up our window frame to be linked to one of those reference planes in the work plane in plan. So which one would we suggest? It's probably going to be the interior offset. So if we can remember how to generate our forms, in this case, we're actually going to generate a form and not a void form, just a regular form. First thing we need to do is come up here to the Create tab, click that Create. Now, previously we did void forms. In this instance, we want to be doing real geometry or real forms. So in order to do that, we're going to do a little extrusion here. You can see solid extrusion up here. So we're going to go ahead and click that. You can see a little video here if you want to hover over our little extrusion. It's going to show you a kind of preview of what we're trying to get at. I'm going to draw a profile, and then it's going to give us an extrusion. So why don't I go ahead? I'm going to click that extrusion piece here. Let's click that. First thing we need to do, if you can remember, is that we need to set our work plane. So I'm going to close this. If you see this little set over here in our work plane panel, we've got set, and if I click on this, the drop down is going to give me set work plane or pick a plane. For us, we're just going to set it. So let's set the work plane. Really, the one that I think is going to make the most sense for us is the interior offset. And that's going to let us set where that frame dimension lives within our window, right? So if we want to move it more towards the exterior or more towards the interior, we're free to do that. And let's get in a little bit more detail in there. So let's set this to the interior offset first. So go ahead and click that. So now we see the interior offset is set as the reference plane, the named reference plane for our work plane. Hit OK. And now we're going to draw our little window frame. And be mindful that we want to make sure that we need to draw everything in closed loops. So what we can do here is I'm going to draw our first rectangle. So let's just go ahead here. Draw our first rectangle. We're drawing, remember, we're not drawing on the outside of the building or the inside of the building. We are drawing on the plane in 3 dimensions. We're drawing on that interior offset work plane. So I'm going to try and find a little X intersection here. Click that. Click the second one. And this is our frame, the exterior part of our frame. Click a second time. And now what we're going to do here is we're going to lock these. So let's make sure that we lock all of these little pink lines. And that what that does is it's going to lock the exterior bounds of our frame to those other work planes. So those work planes are going to be our left and our right and our top and our sill, our head and our sill. So what that's doing is it's giving Revit the information to say, okay, these need to move along with those preset parameters. Okay, so second thing here is this is just, imagine that this is just an edge. So what we need to do, in fact, is we're going to try and generate geometry that is more like a frame. So let's go ahead and we're going to offset this. So we can do this a couple different ways. I think the simplest thing to do here is we're going to come up here and double tap escape. Let's go ahead and we're going to draw a second rectangle inset to the first one. And let's go ahead and do that. So click that rectangle again in our draw panel. Click that. Where it says offset, we're going to give it some dimension. You know, these frames are going to range anywhere from, call it 50 millimeters or 2 inches, all the way up to, you know, it can be any dimension. You can call it 100 millimeters, maybe 150 millimeters. For us, let's just keep it to 50 for now. And I'll show you what that looks like. So type in 50 up here in our options bar. I'm going to leave that radius unchecked for now. And click our little rectangle tool here. And if we start drawing the same thing, you're going to see that our offset has happened by 50 millimeters. In this case, we've got it on the outside of the window frame. And what we want this to do is actually be on the inside, right? We want it to be inset from that original rectangle. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the space bar. The space bar will flip how our offset is working. So if I just go ahead and hit space bar, we'll see how it quickly just jumps to the inside. Pretty simple, good stuff. So I'm going to click again, second time. And now we don't necessarily have to lock these. Now what we do need to do is set a dimension. So you can see I've already preset this 50 millimeters for our offset, but that doesn't actually lock the overall dimension to the original work plane. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to double tap escape and double tap escape. And now what we can do is we're actually going to go up to the annotate and the aligned dimension tool. And we're going to lock these dimensions to 50 millimeters. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'll show you what that looks like. So we need to lock the top. See this little lock symbol on the right here. We're going to lock that. We're going to dimension here on the left side. Zoom out a little bit. I gotta lock this from the bottom. I'm gonna lock this, and then again the side. We're gonna lock this. So make sure that we've locked those dimensions. And what that does is it's going to set all of our the dimension of our frame. This is not a parameter in this case. This is just a preset 50 millimeter locked in frame. We can come back and change this if we want to later. But for us, for right now, this is what we're going to do. So if I double tap escape now, and the last thing we can do is check out the extrusion end here. So if we think about back to where the extrusion is starting, we know to be our interior offset work plane. And now really, I'm not sure which direction this is going to go. So we can either leave this as 250 and hit OK, and then we can modify this later. But this is giving the three-dimensional into the page, out of the page dimension for our overall depth of our window frame in this case. So if we want to go ahead and change this, we can. I would suggest a kind of starting dimension of 150 millimeters. So why don't we just get in here and let's set this to 150, hit apply, and let's see what we've got. So let's just checkbox here. Let's see what we got. So finish the edit. It's called finishing the edit here. So let's hit that checkbox, and we should see everything has kind of, it appears as though we've got the correct geometry here as we look at this in elevation. However, we should also double check in our 3D and in our plan view. So let's just check our plan view here and see what this looks like. So I can see a problem already. That's okay. It means that the way that we've set up the depth of the extrusion is actually it's positive, but it should have been negative. So this will be more clear if we just jump to our plan view or our reference level view. So if I just jump to, I've got it open already, but if you've forgotten how to get here in the project browser, underneath floor plans, double click that reference level, and we'll see, oh, nuts. Okay, this isn't quite going to work exactly how we want. So what we can do is we can take the little shape handle here, pull, click, drag, and drag it to where you want. And we can either set it, we can lock it here to the interior work plane, or we can just let it loose for now, and we can see if there's a dimension that maybe makes more sense for us. And I'll get more into this in a little bit, just because I think it's important when we're thinking about the overall depth of our wall when it comes to the best in town office example, that we're going to end up probably needing to have a little bit deeper of a frame assembly here than what's currently shown. So currently we are matching this 69 millimeter interior, what's it called? The interior offset reference plane. So 69 is probably not deep enough, but for the purposes of just right now, bear with me and we'll get to this in a little bit. So if I jump back to 3D, we should see the frame in roughly the right location, right? Looks good. So we can mess with the depth in a little bit, but you can see that if I just click on this void form, that it starts at 0 and then goes to negative 69. So negative 69 is the overall depth. I can modify this, but it is not a modifiable parameter in the same way that it would be for our height, our width, our sill height. So we kind of locked that and we've set it. Okay, second piece now is the glazing itself, the glass itself. So for that is also going to be just a regular style of extrusion. And let's jump back into our exterior view here. And what we need to do now is create a second extrusion. So that extrusion we're actually going to lock to the inside of our frame here. And let's just go ahead and do that. So if we remember, we've got create. We are going to set our reference plane here. For us, we're probably going to use the same reference plane. So set reference plane to the interior offset. And we'll see what this looks like in a bit. It's just a way to set up the start and the stop of where that glazing panel needs to sit. Go ahead and hit OK. And now we're going to create our glazing piece. So the glazing extrusion. So click again in our forms panel underneath create tab, hit extrusion. Click once. We've set up our work planes. Just double check this, make sure that's cool. So interior offset looks good. The depth of the glass is probably going to be around, 6 to 8. So let's just set it to -6 for now. And we know that that dimension is going to come inboard. So, and then we're going to make a little rectangular extrusion here. So if I click rectangle, boom. And now we're going to draw the rectangle at the inside edge of this frame. So it kind of snaps here. We don't need to do any offsets. Leave just a regular rectangle. Click once, click twice, and now we're going to lock each of these edges. So let's go ahead and lock those. Our depth now is -6 with the extrusion start at 0. I think this is going to work for now, and I'll show us some examples of what we need to get to. So hit that little check mark button to finish the overall extrusion model. Let's hit finish mode. Here we go. Great, right? So great. Before we do anything else, one thing that Revit is, it doesn't know what this material is. So because we know that this is glass, we need to tell Revit that the material itself is glass. That way we can kind of see through it when we see the model. This is going to be an important step because otherwise you're going to have a kind of blank, opaque surface that Revit won't be able to tell is supposed to be a window. So let's jump up here where it says material in our properties palette. So if you've, for whatever reason, if you've clicked off of the window, what we can do here is just hover over our extrusion, click again, and over here in the materials and finishes in our properties palette, we can actually come over here and hit the little ellipses, and it's going to populate with a couple options here. So we've got a couple of options. If I just click out, analytical panels, default, all these things, roof, wall. We really want to set it to glass. So let's set this to glass. Go ahead and hit OK. So now let's check this out in 3D. Hit our little view. Let's see what we got, view 1. So looking pretty good, pretty reasonable. Now let's check it out in our reference level panel here. So let's go here. And we can see here that the glazing edge is sitting right at the edge of our interior offset plane. And it's up to us if we would like to keep this here or if we kind of want to modify it to be inset from the edge of that frame. So just to give us a little bit more evidence here, if I zoom in a little bit, pretty thick, right? The lines are pretty thick. If we remember, we can actually modify our view temporarily to just show thin lines. So when things start to get really, really narrow and we're using these fat lines, it can be difficult to see what's going on. So what we can do is if we come up to the View tab, we can actually set our thin lines just to see with a little bit more clarity what's going on. So if I click this, we're going to see everything kind of flash into this thin line interface. Temporarily, it hasn't done anything to the overall geometry, hasn't done anything to really anything in Revit except give us a little bit more fidelity when it comes to looking at, say, this window itself. So you can see that our link, so our parameter link is really to this work plane. And we've set that, we know that the, we know that the window pane here, the extrusion end is at -6 and the start is at 0. So the starting point is at this reference plane. And then it's saying, okay, from that reference plane, we're going to set it -6 down from there. So if we wanted to modify this, so say for instance, we want to modify this to be in somewhere closer to the midpoint of the glass, midpoint of the frame, what we can do is we can set this up to be offset from the starting point. So in that case, say we've got a window frame that's 50 millimeters or so. Let's set this to -25 to start here. -25, whoops. And then let's set this extrusion end to -31. Right? So do we see that jump? So that's now sitting closer to the middle of the glass. For our purposes, I just want to get us to a point where we can start to take a look at these and see what they look like in 3D. So let's crack this open in 3D and see if this is any better. Right? So we can see now from the inside, we can start to see this little edge, which is great for us. Right, from the outside. And then from the inside, we can also see our little frame edge here with our glass sitting just kind of in the midpoint of it, right? I want to make sure that this material here is set to glass. It is, okay. Looks good. So we got that glass material in there, and now we can see all the way through our frame. So if we remember, one helpful thing to do at this point, I would suggest is the first step is going to be we're going to try and break the family again. And that's just to make sure that some of our parameters are still intact after we've got our frame and our glazing edge all locked in here. So let's go ahead and open up. If we see our properties panel, not the properties palette, but the properties panel, we can see family types in here. So the family types command, let's open this up. And you will not see the frame dimension or the glazing dimension in here. They were not set up as parameters, just to be clear. So we haven't set those up as parameters. They are locked into the family itself. So if I'm just going to go ahead and change, say, the height of the window here, let's go ahead and change this to 1500, hit apply. We should see that whole assembly grow, right? So that 50 millimeter frame is still intact. The window itself is still intact. This is looking pretty good. So why don't we go ahead and let's change something like the left offset, change this to 550, something noticeable, hit apply. Still looks good. Should probably change the width of the window, see what this looks like, hit apply, I'm gonna make it 800, apply. Again, we can see that these family properties, family parameters are now operating correctly. So that's great. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit apply, hit OK. And now we should probably try and load this into a model. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply start up a very rudimentary model with a wall, and you'll see what happens when we load this family. So I'm going to go ahead, and if we remember, I'm just going to start up a file, new project. I'm going to use the architectural template. Hit OK. Now the first thing I'm going to do is just draw any wall. It doesn't matter what style of wall. All we want to see is the family doing what it's supposed to do. So let's draw a wall doesn't matter what family type it is. Let's just give it a shot here. So some dimension, some height, and we'll jump back to our family. And then we're actually going to load. Let's make sure we save this. So make sure you save as much as you can, a little save icon. So save somewhere smart, and then load into project. You'll see over here, if we've got nothing selected, we can load this into a project, and let's load it into here. So we've got it loaded now into our project. Revit has said, okay, cool, you must want me to load it into here. This is operating much like how we want. This is a window family, and I can kind of locate this anywhere along the wall, and all I want to do is start the process of inserting a couple of these windows and seeing what it looks like. So if I hover at the top here, it's going to put it in the appropriate spot, which is at the bottom. So interior here is down here, exterior is up here for this particular wall. Why don't I just go ahead and I'm going to click a couple wall types, excuse me, a couple windows into our overall assembly here. Okay, so as a starting point, this is good. If we jump to the 3D, we should see a couple different iterations of our window family. We can see that the frame is intact, the glazing assembly is intact, and the void form itself is intact. Now remember that these are instance properties for our void blend here. So if we do change one of these windows, the other windows will remain as they are. So why don't I go ahead and I'm going to jump to our 3D view here. Jump here. Window, this wall is a little bit high, so let's just drop this a little bit. Let's give it a little bit high. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to turn off the levels for right now. We don't really need these on. Hit OK. So now let's just go ahead and why don't we see if we can modify a couple of these window types, and we can see if we can change these families live inside of our model here. So we can see that some of those parametric things are available inside of our instance of our family here. So we can see the left offset, the right offset, and the top offset. So these are what are called the instance parameters for us. So the instance parameters, that means that if I wanted to set the left offset to something different. Why don't I set it to something like 800 here? Set it to 800, hit apply. We should see on the left-hand side here, this little piece jump all the way over. If we set the right offset, let's set it to something super narrow. We should see it jump again all the way over. So if we click on this, set the offset to, let's call it 800, hit apply, and we'll see that that window has now taken on the instance properties, the instance parameters, and the other ones are still existing kind of on their own, hanging out. So if I change this, I can change some of these. Why don't I make them all, make this 200, whoops, make this 200, make this 200, make the top offset 200, and we should see very different looking window, right? Very different looking window from the previous one. And we can see that what are called the instance properties, which we set up in the previous video, are helping to determine the overall parameters of that window assembly and the void form itself. So everything is being changed in real time based on the information we put inside of Revit. So those are the instance parameters. If, for instance, I wanted to modify the overall height and width of these windows, those are family parameters. And what I can do is if I come in here to the edit type, it's a type parameter, we can actually modify, let's change this window height and width. So we'll change this from 1500, let's make it 1800, and let's make the width 1200. And you should see all of our windows that we placed in here update simultaneously. You can see that that's what's called a type parameter and not an instance parameter. So for us, a type parameter means that this family type, we can modify them all at the same time, but an instance parameter is going to modify little pieces of that model, that little family, separately. I'm just going to undo that. Let's jump back in. So there might be something here that we notice that maybe isn't so hot. We can see here, we've got some challenges with, if we jump to the plan view, we've got some challenges with the way that the actual software is seeing our wrap, right? So this really in my head means that maybe our frame isn't deep enough, or maybe that our overall, the way that we've got our reference plane for our interior offset is actually too deep in the wall and it needs to come out a little bit. So if we jump to the plan view, it should be pretty evident here. So remember, I'm going to turn, why don't I turn our thin lines back on so we can see that, just so we can see what's going on here. You can see that that void form cut is actually cutting all the way through everything. It is maybe not quite what we want, right? So it's maybe not quite what we want. So there's a couple things we can do here. We can modify the edge of where that interior offset exists. So remember, I'm just going to draw quickly here a little line to show us where that line, detail line exists. So this right here, this is our interior offset line. If we remember from our model, I'm just going to make this line here. So we can see that this is really where our interior offset line for our work plane was previously. So we know that this could be a problem. And what we can do is we can actually modify this to maybe instead of being, I'm going to assume that this is at 69. So let's just double check. So you can remember it's at 69 because that's where we set the interior to that interior offset to be 69. So for us, what we could do is measure from, say, this line to here, and that's 145. So 145 millimeters. Why don't we go ahead and let's go back to our family editor and we'll change that value from 69 and make it 145. And then we'll reload the family and see what happens. So let's double tap escape. It's going to delete this super quick. Let's jump back into our reference level here from our family. And what we'll do, we'll actually modify this. We're in our reference level for our family geometry. And if we click on the interior offset, we can actually just modify this little dimension here. First thing we've got to do is actually unlock it. So let's go ahead and do that. Now unlock this. And now, if I click on that interior offset work plane or reference plane, I can edit the dimension length here. I'm going to set it to 145, right? We can see immediately, I'm just going to zoom out here and zoom out so you can see what happened. So I'm going to click on that interior offset reference plane, and I'm going to modify this 69. Instead of 69, I'm going to set it to 145. Go ahead and do that, and then click anywhere outside of the model here. Just click over here. And now we can see the entire thing jumps up, right? So it jumps up. One thing we do want to do is we want to make sure that this dimension is locked. We don't want to mess around with that. But you will see that now that extrusion has changed dimension, right? So now that extrusion, instead of 69 for the void, it's 145. And the way that our blend is starting is actually a little bit different. So our void blend has now started further into the wall. It still ends at the same point, but you can see here that that modification should help us update our family here. So I'm going to go ahead and save again. Let's save this and then load into our project. It's going to ask me, do I want to overwrite the existing version? So let's see what this looks like. Let's overwrite it. And we can see here, looking a little bit better, still a little tight on the edges here, so we can mess around a little bit with this. But I think this is probably a good start. And if we jump to the 3D view here, we should see that our actual brick is coming all the way in to the inset here. So this is looking a little bit better, looking a little bit more like our window family that we set up for our best in town office, right? So we're getting closer to what we need it to be. One more thing. So if I'm going to jump back to our best in town office example, I'm going to go to a plan view so you can see a little bit more detail on what this the overall frame looks like. And maybe we can set up some of those additional parameters here. So let's jump to a plan view. And for that, I'm going to go to page 3 here, zoom out a little bit. We can see here, we've got a little bit of extra meat here. So we actually pull that window even beyond where the brick is existing. So we might even, instead of that 145, maybe we actually make it 200. And then we'll make that 200, and the actual frame dimension you can see is quite a bit deeper here. So what we can do is we can set that frame dimension as well to maybe be a little bit deeper. So the first step here, why don't we just create a little bit more space for us? We'll give a little bit more room, and let's see what that looks like. So back to our family, what we can do here is jump to our family editor, and let's just call it, why don't we just call it 200? So let's jump back in here. If we don't remember how to do this, we just click on the interior offset. We got to unlock it first. Come back in here. Let's call this 200, in fact. Right? Still haven't broken the model. Everything is looking good. We do need to make sure that we lock this in place. Step 1. Step 2 is maybe we want to make this extrusion just a little bit deeper, right? So we want to make it a little bit deeper. Let's call it 150. Why don't we even call it 200? We'll give ourselves a little bit of space here. So let's call this negative 200 up in the extrusion end here, and you should see it jump all the way up, and we should be sitting kind of all the way inside at the interior side of our window here. We'll just do that again so we can see it. Negative 69 to negative 200. You can see how that just modifies, right? So it's up to us if we want to modify the location of the overall window pane itself. We might also want to do this. Let's say maybe we make it start in roughly the middle of this. And rather than set up any parameters, let's just make it negative 100 and negative 106. Let's just do this. Be the safest and simplest way to do it. And now we can see, again, we've got a modification to the overall family. Frame is looking good. Glass is looking good. We are going to reload that into the project, overwrite the existing system, the existing family, and now we can see that we've got this nifty little window family that's existing. If we jump to 3D, Everything's still intact, looking good. And this is really pretty close to where we need to be. One thing you might notice is that the overall dimension of our window here. So we've got, we don't have the correct EW1 in this particular model. So that's one thing to be mindful of. If we want to check that out, what we can do is we can actually modify this wall to be more precise to what our EW2 wall is. So why don't I go ahead and we can just do that now inside this model. I'm just going to remake our little family for the wall itself, and we can just modify this family type as it exists. And it's going to come up here to our edit type and start to modify our structure to match what we've got in our best in town family type here. So I'm going to grab this from, so 90, 60, 300. So we got 90 for the brick, 60 for the air gap. I move this down, make this 300. I bet you're already thinking, well, this might change the overall depth of that frame. And it may. So we just need to be mindful of certain things like this. And we'll check it out, see what we get. I'm going to insert a little AVB here, make sure we're cool with this. We got, where is our membrane? Should probably be thermal. It's got to be 0. What else we got in here? E 90 and then 92. So this should probably be gypsum. Gypsum. Wallboard, make that 16. We're going to insert this. We'll call that structure. That's cool. And then metal stud wall. So let's do this in here. Where is my stud? There it is, metal stud layer. 92. 748. It's looking pretty good. Now, we may see some challenges here. So let's see what we've got. In my imagination, we might have to reset our interior work plane. So interior offset work plane, I should say. So let's hit OK and see what we get. Hit OK, hit apply, boom. So this does happen. And what we can see here is that given the depth of our kind of test wall, our test wall is only roughly 300. So let's just jump back to our little family model here. I think it's 300. Basic wall, generic, 300. And our wall, by comparison, I believe is 748. So you can see here the width of that wall is 748. So some challenges here, but what we're going to do is we're just going to make some modifications. And one thing we can do first is we can change the overall depth of our wall in our family type just to kind of test and check out if you do have really thick walls, it can have an impact on things like our families, right? So let's go ahead and hit cancel here. I'm going to jump back to our Revit family editor. And why don't we go ahead and we just modify this basic wall here. This won't do anything. We'll just modify it to be, let's just do 750. Hit OK. And I'm just going to rename this to 750 so we can see what's going on. Right? So we can see some challenges here. So quite a bit different with the overall dimension of our wall. If you're going from something like a 300 millimeter wall all the way up to 750 millimeter wall, you can see that that family might change, might need to change, and we can control that. But I just wanted everybody to see that this is the kind of some of the challenges that might emerge as we change our wall types. So if we jump back to our where we were testing the families, so mine's level 0, might be different for you. One thing we can do is we can set up, again, that interior offset work plane to be in a different location than was previously set. So I think we had set it at 200. But for us, I think we're probably going to want to set it somewhere around 375. If we give ourselves a little bit extra, why don't we just call it 425? And let's see what that looks like. So if we're going to come back to our family editor here, and I want to set that interior offset work plane to be 425 away from the wall. So come back in here, our interior offset, we want it to be 425. And I just unlock it temporarily. Click back our interior offset, set it to 425. Whoops, 425. Click off. You should see everything come up here, and that's good. But you can see again how thick our wall is. This is really one of the challenges of these really deep wall assemblies. We want to situate that frame in a place that makes sense. So why don't we just go ahead and make sure we lock this. You're going to click on the dimension and click that little lock. Save our model. So save it. And then last step here in our family editor, load into project. I'm going to overwrite the existing version. Ta-da! Everything is looking pretty good. We can see here we've got the frame inset properly. We've got the brick cooperating. Everything looks to be in pretty good shape here. If I turn on our thin lines here, I just type TL. Remember, we can type TL to get to our shortcut or come to our view panel, view ribbon, and click thin lines here on and off. So what we can do now is let's just jump to our 3D. Looking pretty good. So you can see here, given the depth of our wall, everything is cooperating. And this is really probably the end of the tutorial. And it's really as far as we need to get for our best in town office project. So that being said, I welcome any comments or questions. That does take us to the end of this tutorial. I think that for the future tutorials, I'll try and focus on some other structural pieces. And but for now, if you do have questions or comments, let me know, and we can try and get some of those questions answered. So thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, guys.